Good evening to everybody. As mentioned, I'm here because I spent time in the state jurisdiction of New South Wales in Australia as Environment Minister, and later I chaired an advisory group that drafted the Australian Government's National Wildlife Corridors Plan, approved by the Cabinet of Australia late last year. Am I controlling this? This one? It's not working. There. That's it. Okay. Sorry about that. We're speaking then of the National Wildlife Corridor Plan, which is now official government policy in Australia, a plan that's written in straightforward language and given a name that makes it accessible to everyday folk, but it has a very powerful intellectual heritage. The founding of conservation biology by Michael Soule and the inspiration of the Wildlands Project, the science of the Wildlands Project in the United States, transformed for the Australian ecology by Professor Brendan Mackey and his colleagues. The achievements of the late Chandra Gurung and Mingma Sherpa in Nepal and Bhutan. The pioneering work of Mario Bosa in Mesoamerica. The idea of the Yellowstone to Yukon corridor presented by Harvey Locke to the World Conservation Congress in 1996. It strikes me that the idea of connectivity conservation is a little like the idea of national parks. Once articulated, it seems self-evident. This is how our plan understands connectivity to work at the large scale. We've proceeded on the basis, as a matter of scientific fact, that legislating for national parks and legislating for the protection of threatened species is necessary to arrest the decline of biodiversity, but it's not enough. You also have to restore damaged ecosystem processes across broad landscapes, regardless of tenure. Now that's easy to say, and it's very hard to do. It requires a new sort of public governance, not the enforcement of strict regulations, but flexible support for voluntary networks of landowners and organisations in a common purpose and over a very long time. There's been a lot of pioneering work, scientific, conceptual and on-ground work over the last decade in Australia. And this sketch map shows the general location of the major landscape initiatives that are now underway. Some of them were first promoted by state governments and some were first promoted by NGOs. Our national plan proposes that these 6 initiatives should be given the first opportunity to become what will be formally recognised national corridors. And I shall briefly describe 2 of them to give you the flavour. The first is a vision for conservation along the Great Dividing Range which runs the length of eastern Australia. It was first proposed 10 years ago by 2 men who have remained my principal guides and informants ever since, Graham Warboys and Ian Pulsford. It's a pretty bold idea. Up in the top left-hand corner there are some comparisons of land areas. Nevertheless, in 2007, I was able to announce that the State Government of New South Wales was providing funds for a Great Eastern Ranges Corridor strategy to help conserve what are Australia's richest concentrations of species against a variety of threats, including, of course, climate change. The 3,000-kilometre corridor contains 3 World Heritage Areas. The yellow shaded area is the land within the initiative. The green areas are national park and state forest. Some 30% of the area is already protected estate. Several million hectares have been declared under wilderness legislation. So there is a strong anchor for connectivity, but there are gaps. The changing landscapes of the corridor from alpine environment to tropical forest inspire voluntary commitment to an exciting idea. But the corridor idea also makes a practical framework for collective planning to restore ecological connectivity. In 2007, the State Government of New South Wales, or the Environment Department, established a secretariat that in turn worked with a number of respected NGOs to establish community partnerships for connectivity conservation in 5 priority areas. Each of the coloured patches you can see on that map is a substantial corridor within a corridor, defined by local geography, supported by local organisations. These corridors within corridors have since attracted government funding and also NGO support. Several new partnerships have since come together, and new alliances are now established outside the state of New South Wales to the north and to the south. After 6 years of growth, more than 160 community organisations are now working with many hundreds of landholders in land restoration and conservation activity. Business planning is overseen by a committee that includes representatives of farmers, conservationists, Aboriginal groups, government agencies and a university. This is the Border Ranges National Park. It's a World Heritage listed subtropical rainforest, Gondwana rainforest we call it, within the Great Eastern Ranges Corridor. But far down on the other side of the present continent of Australia, there are more connections with the ancient continent of the Gondwana. You can stand on cliffs on the southern coast there that exactly match cliffs far across the ocean in Antarctica. 130 million years ago, India was just off the east coast near Perth. And this is another biodiversity hotspot with some of the characteristics of South Africa's floristic province. Work began on the Gondwana Link corridor 10 years ago, when the government of the state of Western Australia had just responded to community action by ending old-growth logging in the magnificent forests at the eastern end of the corridor. And in the west, where broad-scale land clearing was ended at about the same time, an alliance of NGOs responded to the vision of the charismatic conservationist Keith Bradby by starting on their own initiative a program to buy back and to revegetate large rural landholdings that stretched between 2 national parks. That slide, the range in that slide is one of them. Now there are 11,000 hectares under conservation management and 2,500 hectares under a dynamic program of native vegetation restoration. This slide shows the location of the restoration work and also the location of conservation action plans initiated by groups of farmers who have been guided by the Gondwana Link vision. Many of them have attracted government funding. Nevertheless, as we know, corridors won't work without the engagement of people. This is Gondwana Link's Christmas card. So our national corridor policy says that this kind of activity needs to be encouraged, especially in areas of high biodiversity value. We know from experience that a corridor initiative won't prosper without a strong vision and resilient leadership. Physical localities and individual communities are always distinct, so no collaboration can be identical with another. However, I am hopeful that we will now add to the existing large-scale corridor initiatives in Australia, that we will, for instance, see formal connectivity partnerships emerge in the great river systems of the interior and across the largely intact savanna land of the north, some of which looks like this. The first part of our National Corridor Plan explains the purpose of connectivity and the idea of landscape resilience. It argues the importance of a network of corridors operating at all scales, and in that respect it has already quite strongly influenced local conservation planning around the country. The plan explains the significance of voluntary action over a mosaic of tenures and the application of both science and Indigenous knowledge of the environment. It recognises that corridor initiatives require different management strategies in different landscapes. In remote areas of relatively intact land like this, where the main problems are feral animal invasion and inappropriate fire regimes, in fragmented land, and in peri-urban areas which still retain some significant biodiversity values. That's Sydney Harbour National Park. The National Plan identifies the people and places and processes that provide the foundation for a network of corridors, and I'll speak of some of them in just a bit more detail. Evidently, the plan would be pointless without the engagement of private landholders. However, a substantial proportion of farmers in Australia participate in a 25-year-old program called Landcare. Local groups work, sometimes assisted by small government grants, to reverse the degradation of their land. They can take part in a variety of stewardship and conservation covenanting schemes. At the same time, NGOs are in some cases already aligning conservation purchasing programs with corridors, as I've mentioned. But I hope I make it clear also that our plan builds on the bedrock of the protected reserve estate. This map, by the way, includes the recent increase, very substantial increase in marine protected zones in Australian waters. But at the terrestrial level, 13.5% of Australia is reserved, and 30% of that is Indigenous Protected Area, IPA, that's the red on the map, which is set to increase a lot in the next few years. IPAs are declared as protected areas and managed by Indigenous interests according to an environment plan, a healthy country plan. And the federal government is at present funding nearly 100 Indigenous ranger groups to look after them. Our plan also acknowledges the importance of ecological pathways, river systems, flyways, and the natural pathways sometimes marked by Aboriginal songlines and trading routes. Regional arrangements for managing the environment in Australia have been established through 54 natural resource management organisations, funded mainly by the federal government. They're not supported as strongly as they should be, in my view, by some of the state governments most strongly oriented to the exploitation of natural resources, but nevertheless each region has a natural resource management plan which provides a blueprint for sustainable resource use, and we've been doing something to improve them in recent times. NRM organisations are already active in the two corridors that I've been describing to you. So the National Plan describes the foundation stones in pink, and it sets down a 5-point action program or plan for building a national corridor network, developing and supporting new existing corridors, establishing enduring institutional arrangements, and so on. Actually, the work of implementation is poised right now at an early stage, and I guess we wait to see whether the new Australian government, elected only a couple of weeks ago, is as committed to the plan as the previous government was. As I have said, the network will be underpinned by the creation of national corridors. The 6 largest existing corridor initiatives are being offered a walk-up start. Nomination will come from the community. Declaration will be made by the Minister, who will in turn be advised by a national committee of environmental experts. I close with an iconic picture. Uluru is not only in the centre of Australia, it's now in the centre of an emerging national wildlife corridor. Thank you.